17-year-old Emily Carter arrived in Salem Falls with a suitcase full of silence. Since the accident that killed her parents, she hadn't spoken a single word. Her Aunt Margaret welcomed her into the old Victorian house at the edge of town, a house locals whispered was cursed. At night, Emily could hear faint murmurs behind the walls, like someone whispering her name from another world. The town psychiatrist said it was grief. Her aunt said it was the wind, but the whispers grew louder, clearer, and more familiar. One night, as the clock struck 3, she heard her mother's voice say, "Emily, they're still here." Frozen in terror, she pressed her ear to the wall and heard her father's voice answer. The silence that once protected her had now become her prison, and what she thought was trauma was only the beginning of something much darker. Emily began recording the strange noises that haunted her nights. When she played the tape back, she heard more than whispers. She heard screams. They came in bursts, distorted and desperate, begging for help. Detective Mark Daniels was assigned to investigate the case, suspecting trespassers or delusions. But when he listened to Emily's recordings, his blood ran cold. Among the screams were words, names, dates, and pleas tied to unsolved murders in Salem Falls. The psychiatrist brushed it off as coincidence, claiming Emily's mind was echoing old local legends. Yet when Emily tried to sleep, the whispers returned, clearer than before. They began describing deaths that had never been reported, until the next morning's news proved them true. Someone or something was speaking to her from the other side, and every word was a warning wrapped in horror. Underneath the creaking floorboards, Emily found a small wooden compartment sealed by rusted nails. Inside lay a decayed leather-bound diary belonging to Annabelle Cross, a girl who lived in the same house nearly 50 years earlier. Annabelle wrote about the voices beneath the silence and how they promised eternal understanding if she learned to listen. Each page was more unsettling than the last, describing shadows that moved without light and reflections that whispered back. As Emily read, her surroundings began to mimic the diary's words. The walls seemed to breathe, and her reflection began to move slightly out of sync. When she reached the final page, the ink was still wet, as though Annabelle had just written it, and in faint letters, the diary ended with a chilling line, "Welcome home, Emily." Detective Daniels uncovered a disturbing secret buried in government archives. Emily's parents were not only researchers, they had been involved in illegal psychological experiments at the Blackridge Mental Institute, studying a phenomenon called auditory inversion, where subjects could supposedly hear thoughts beyond human frequency. Emily, it turned out, had been part of the final trial as a child. As the truth surfaced, her silence broke, but not through words. Her reflection began to whisper everything she couldn't say. It spoke in perfect clarity, repeating details from the accident she couldn't possibly remember. The detective's flashlight flickered as her reflection smiled independently of her body. Every mirror in the house began humming, vibrating with static voices. Emily's reflection leaned closer, whispering, "You were never meant to stop hearing them." And for the first time, Emily realized her silence wasn't healing, it was containment. Audio experts were brought in to analyze Emily's recordings, hoping to debunk the mystery. What they found defied science. The frequencies within her tapes were far below the human threshold of hearing, yet when slowed, they formed coherent words. "Let us speak," the voices said, overlapping like a distorted choir. During playback, the lights in the lab flickered violently before one of the speakers exploded with a blood-curdling scream. Further analysis revealed something even more horrifying. The sound waves didn't originate from the environment, but from inside a human brain. Emily wasn't recording ghosts, she was recording thoughts that weren't hers. The experiment her parents began had opened a gate where the mind itself became the transmitter. And when the researchers tried to replicate the phenomenon, they vanished, leaving only recordings that screamed without sound, just like Emily's. The residents of Salem Falls began losing pieces of themselves. Entire days went missing from memory, and people started hearing voices echoing their deepest fears. The sheriff's office received dozens of calls reporting loved ones speaking in reversed voices or appearing in mirrors after they'd left the room. Detective Daniels realized that whatever had infected Emily was spreading like a frequency plague. Emily, however, wasn't terrified anymore. She understood it now. The voices weren't haunting her, they were using her as a bridge. Her silence had become their language. As the town descended into chaos, Emily stood in the center of it, eyes vacant, as whispers flowed through her body. The world around her flickered like a dying signal. Salem Falls was no longer a town, it was an echo chamber for the damned. When her aunt entered her room one evening, Emily sat perfectly still in the dark, her lips unmoving but her eyes following invisible shapes. Her skin looked pale, almost translucent. The psychiatrist attempted one last session, placing Emily under hypnosis, but he never finished. The next morning, he was found dead with the words "Listen to her" carved into the walls in his own handwriting. Emily's mouth remained shut, yet recordings from nearby microphones captured her voice, speaking fluently, reciting prayers backward and describing scenes from the psychiatrist's death before it happened. The town now lived in terror, believing Emily was possessed, but the truth was more sinister. Her consciousness had slipped into the frequency field. She no longer needed her voice. She had found a new way to be heard through every speaker, every whisper, every silent scream. Detective Daniels pieced together the fragments of the case, realizing Emily was the final success of an abandoned experiment, one designed to open the barrier between thought and sound, life and death. Her silence had tuned her brain into a frequency beyond the living. As he sat in his car, surrounded by static, he played the last recording from Emily's room. At first it was only white noise, then a faint voice emerged, soft, sorrowful, and unmistakably hers. "Now you can hear me." The moment he whispered back, the static grew into a deafening roar. The entire town's radios came alive, broadcasting a symphony of whispers that merged into a single, haunting scream. The final transmission ended with silence, not peaceful, but pulsing, alive. Somewhere within that silence, Emily's mind waited, forever screaming without a sound.